China vowed to defend national interests and said that there are no winners in a trade war or a tariff war. On the other hand, Trump's administration might also hit the European Union with tariffs. Trump also signaled to hit Canada and Mexico with 25% punitive tariffs. While Canada pledged robust and rapid and measured pushback, Mexico urged calm in the face of Trump's trade threats that risk throwing their economies into disarray. The punitive tariffs against the United States' two major trading partners could come as early as February 1. Germany's conservative opposition leader Friedrich Merz, frontrunner in the polls to become the next chancellor, urged a united European stance in talks with President Trump. Whereas German Chancellor Olaf Scholz hoped for the United States to continue to be its closest ally outside Europe, Scholz also noted that Trump and his administration will keep the world on tenterhooks in the coming years.
The United States is our closest ally outside Europe. I will do everything I can to ensure that it stays that way. Our first discussion with President Trump and the contacts between our advisors point in this direction. Trump and his administration will keep the world on tenterhooks in the coming years in energy and climate policy, in trade policy, in foreign and security policy. But we
Willkommen in der ungewöhnlich echten Welt von knusper.de. Echt feldfrisches Gemüse, echt ofenfrisches Brot, echt zarte Steaks, echt italienische Pasta, echt zuverlässig geliefert. Bestelle jetzt bei knusper.de. Echt ungewöhnlich.
Or what another Trump administration could mean. Joining us with more is DW correspondent Emily Leshner in Berlin. Emily, Trump has already signed nearly 80 executive orders since taking office. It shows that he's intent on making the changes that he promised while campaigning. What has been the reaction from the EU to the swiftness of his policy changes?
Yes, you're right. He certainly has wasted no time in following through on some of his campaign promises, like pulling the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Agreement. So there is a real concern in Europe that he's going to go ahead with some of the other promises he's made, some of which would have a direct and an immediate impact on Europe, like his promise of increasing tariffs from 10 to 20% on goods coming from the EU. And for the German car industry, for example, this would be pretty devastating. The auto sector here is already struggling because of high labor and energy costs and stiff competition from China. It's teetering at the edge of survival, and it's unclear if it can survive another blow like the tariffs would be. But on the other side, the fear that Trump will follow through has had a really interesting effect on EU leaders. In the past couple of days, there have been several leaders who have been calling for reform across the EU. Both the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen spoke at the World Economic Forum in Davos, saying that now was the time for Europe to band together, to reform and reinvest. And Scholz is traveling to France today to meet with Macron to chart this new path forward and to prepare for the next 4 years.
Right. And what happens next to these countries affected by Trump's policies? In a sense, what options do they have?
Well, I think, there isn't a country that won't be affected, even if it's indirectly by Trump's policies, or at the very least, the ripple effect of Trump's policies. But for countries that are targeted specifically by Trump, like Germany, where I am, there are really two options. One is to lay as much regulatory groundwork as possible, and the other is simply to wait. So let's take Trump's threat to put 10 to 20% tariffs on EU goods as an example. If he does do this, it would be devastating to the auto sector, and it would be quite a big blow because it could incentivize German companies to move to the U.S. So right now, German leaders like Economy Minister Robert Habeck, they're calling for reforms that would make German and other European economies good places to run a business, to set a stage that is advantageous for companies to keep conducting business in the bloc. And Ursula von der Leyen announced that the EU Commission would also be unveiling proposals soon that would help do this, do things like bring down energy prices and increase domestic investment to streamline markets in Europe. So while EU leaders just need to wait to take their next cue from Trump, they can also start laying some groundwork for what they think will happen in the next a few years. And tariffs on goods would make things very expensive for U.S. consumers. So it's possible that this is just an empty threat and just a bargaining tactic from Trump. That's why it's just too early for the EU to make any real moves like threaten their own set of retaliatory tariffs. It seems from statements from EU officials in the past few days that the EU knows it needs to be as proactive as possible to continue to be competitive. It just can't afford to only sit back and wait. So it has to lay some groundwork while it can.
Emily, thank you for those updates. Donald Trump has also indicated that he may impose fresh sanctions on Russia if President Putin refuses to negotiate a deal to end the conflict in Ukraine. Trump made these remarks while talking to media at the White House. However, the U.S. president gave no details on